Nelson Mandela once said, "The struggle is my life." He ought to know. Following years of fighting against racial segregation and violence in South Africa, he was arrested in 1962 and sentenced to life in prison. But on February 11, 1990, Mandela was released after nearly 3 decades in incarceration. 4 years later, he was elected president of South Africa. He went from prison to the presidency in 4 years. It's an amazing story. Well, if you think that's something, just tune in for this chapter of the story. This is chapter 3. We're talking about Joseph's life. And if anyone understood struggles and unjust treatment, it was Joseph in the Old Testament. He went from prison to the palace in Egypt literally overnight, but it took a long time to get there. Throughout his story, we see that he faced overwhelming obstacles, but God was with him throughout the whole entire story. And overnight, he went from being in prison to vice president. That would make your head spin just a little bit. Well, we want to look at Joseph's story today and find out how we can be encouraged in our stories. So many times we face struggles and we don't know how to handle them. But one thing that we are assured of is in life that sometimes we're going to have troubles, but Jesus says, "Take heart, for he has overcome the world." We want to help you develop your character, your integrity, and find out that even through the toughest of chapters in our lives that we can overcome because of that simple but profound phrase, God is with us. Let me give you a lower story, bottom line first, and we're going to dive into our text. Say this with me aloud. Church online, say this with me aloud. Integrity has nothing to do with circumstances. No, seriously, say it. Say it out loud. Integrity has nothing to do with circumstances. This Joseph we're talking about, he was the son of Jacob. He was the grandson of Isaac and the great-grandchild of Abraham and Sarah, who we talked about last week. This Joseph, his story unfolds in a number of chapters like any good stories. And I want to walk you through 5 different chapters of Joseph's life. I hope you're ready. The first chapter of Joseph's life would be called From Living the Dream to Rotten Reality. From living the dream to rotten reality. Joseph, he was one of 12 brothers, but he just wasn't just one of the 12. He was Dad's favorite. And we see that throughout that kind of made things awkward in his family. Listen to how chapter 3 of the story begins. Now his brothers had gone to graze their father's flocks near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, "As you know, your brothers are grazing the flocks near Shechem. Come, I am going to send you to them." "Very well," he replied. So he said to him, "Go and see if all is well with your brothers and with the flocks, and bring word back to me." Then he sent him off. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them near Dothan. But they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. "Here comes that dreamer," they said to each other. "Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of those cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him." Well, maybe you're like me as you're reading that story. You come to that part and you think, man, that is messed up. How does a family get so dysfunctional that instead of just pulling a simple prank on them or giving Joseph an atomic wedgie, they want to kill him? How does a family come to that point? Well, let's do some Sherlock Holmes deductive reasoning. Let me present a couple pieces of evidence that we can see maybe why the brothers felt this way. Exhibit A. Joseph's dad gave him a special coat. If you've heard this story before, you know that Joseph was given an ornate coat, technicolored coat, coat of many colors. But we really don't know if it had a Roy G. Biv design, but we know that this coat was special. Only one of the 12 brothers got them. And parents, when you're reading this, don't you think like me, if you're going to give one kid a special coat, you better give all of them a special coat. You better play it up and say, "Hey, you're special, this coat's for you." But Jacob doesn't do that. He gives Joseph the special coat and leaves the other brothers out. I was trying to think about how this would make sense today. It would kind of be like Jacob gives Joseph the new iPhone 5C, and he gives the brothers an old bag phone to put near their camels. I mean, if you did that, there's going to be a little bit of a fight. That's not an even trade. So Joseph and his brothers didn't get along because of that. Look at Exhibit B. Joseph was a bit of a dreamer. Well, what's so bad about dreaming? That's what I said. I mean, so many times we tell our children to dream big or follow your dreams. Well, the only problem for Joseph was that his dreams, in them, his family actually bowed down and worshiped him. Listen to this. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." His brother said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. "Listen," he said, "I had another dream, and this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." When he told his father, listen, as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, "What is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?" Somebody should have put a note in the little brother's handbook. If you have a dream about your older brothers bowing down to you, keep it to yourself. No, seriously, keep it to yourself, or Joseph's life will become yours. Well, if that wasn't enough, Exhibit C, Joseph was a bit of a tattletale. Older siblings, you know this is true, right? Your younger siblings sometimes were a little bit of tattletales growing up. And Joseph, he had already given the father a bad report about them once, and that really ticked him off. But he did it again, and because of that, they wanted to kill him. Listen, I don't know what these brothers were doing whenever Jacob sent him out to go give a report. But one thing that we do know, right, people? If 10 brothers are out there supposed to be working, they're probably not going to be working for very long. They're probably going to be dozing off on the job or playing monkey in the middle with one of the lambs. I mean, we don't really know. But we know a lot of work wasn't getting done. And so Exhibits A plus B plus C, it may not equal murder to us, but to Joseph's brothers, they had had enough, and they wanted to kill him. Thankfully, cooler heads prevailed, and they decided to do something else. Listen to what Judah suggested. Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain by killing our brother? His blood would just give us a guilty conscience. Instead of hurting him, let's sell him to those Ishmaelite traders. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood," and his brothers agreed. So, at the close of Joseph chapter 1, we see a 17-year-old, God-fearing Hebrew go from having a cushy desk job in the family's shop to becoming a slave. That brings us to chapter 2 of Joseph's story. From foreign slave to first in command. From foreign slave to first in command. Genesis 39, 2 through 5 reads, "The Lord was with Joseph, so he succeeded in everything he did as he served in the home of his Egyptian master. Potiphar noticed this and realized that the Lord was with Joseph, giving him success in everything he did. This pleased Potiphar, so he soon made Joseph his personal attendant. He put him in charge of his entire household and everything he owned. From the day Joseph was put in charge of his master's household and property, the Lord began to bless Potiphar's household for Joseph's sake. All his household affairs ran smoothly, and his crops and livestock flourished." All things considered, things could have been worse for Joseph. He could have been killed. But God saw that instead of being killed, there's more to this story. Joseph is sold to an Egyptian man, the chief of the prisoners for the king, also known as maybe one of the king's executioners. He was a pretty powerful man. And Joseph got an opportunity to serve in his household. But think about this. Joseph, when he was sold into slavery, he could have easily, when he was told what to do, he could have said, I know speaky Egyptian. But no, he didn't. He served faithfully. He went probably from, he was taking care of the lawn to all of a sudden he got an inside job. He got to do things around the house. But then eventually he became manager over Potiphar's estate. He was a faithful servant. He was a man of integrity. Not only was Joseph a man of integrity, though, he was a handsome and well-built man, the Bible says. So much so that it caught the eye of Mrs. Potiphar. And she wasn't exactly subtle about her crush for the pool boy. She made it known, and we read each and every time she spoke, what she says is, come and sleep with me. Come to bed with me. But listen to Joseph's response in Genesis 39, 8 through 10. Joseph refused. Look, he told her, my master trusts me with everything in his entire household. No one here has more authority than I do. He has held back nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How could I do such a wicked thing? It would be a great sin against God. Now, we don't know how much of a temptation this was for Joseph. We don't know if she was a trophy wife, housewife, or maybe she was a hillbilly housewife. We don't know. But we do know that Mrs. Potiphar was a woman of power. She could have either promoted Joseph more and made him look good in the Egyptian society, or she could have had him killed. But Joseph didn't see this as just a sexual order. He actually saw this as a chance to be faithful or sin against God. So many times in our lives when we face disappointments, we make excuses, don't we? Because God didn't allow this to happen, we justify our sin. But in Joseph's life, he didn't. He stayed faithful. He could have rationalized to himself he was a lonely guy in a foreign land. He was single, and he was just obeying orders. But no, he stayed true. Do you know why? Because integrity has nothing to do with circumstances. But one day, it happened that Potiphar was on a business trip. The other slaves had taken a break, and Mrs. Potiphar made her issue known. She said again, come to bed with me. And when Joseph sees this happen, he knows that she means business, and she's not going to let him go. So what does he do? No, he doesn't give in, but he runs away. He actually runs out of the house and leaves his coat behind. And when he leaves his coat behind, he finds out the true meaning of the phrase, hell hath no fury like a scorned woman. Because when Potiphar gets back from the business trip, Mrs. Potiphar says that Joseph tried to rape her. And then he is actually put in prison. He could have been killed on the spot right there, but Potiphar puts him in prison. I was thinking to myself, this guy, he deserves a reward for doing the right thing, but he actually gets punished. I also thought about this. So many times in our lives, bad things happen to good people. Sometimes when we actually make the right decision, we get fired. Sometimes when we say no to temptation, bad things happen. But integrity has nothing to do with circumstances, right? Sometimes it'd be so easy to give in to temptation, but we would be disobeying God. So we see in Joseph chapter 3 that although he was falsely accused, he becomes a prison trustee. That's chapter 3. From falsely accused convict to prison trustee. Genesis 39:22 through 23 says, before long, the warden put Joseph in charge of all the other prisoners and over everything that happened in the prison. The warden had no more worries because Joseph took care of everything. The Lord was with him and caused everything he did to succeed. We've seen so far that Joseph's been trying to do the right thing, but then his brother sold him into slavery. Then he was trying to do the right thing and say no to Mrs. Potiphar, but she ends up getting him put in jail. But now, maybe we're seeing a little bit of a turn in the story. Maybe there's some good news that's about to come. Well, I learned recently, I was visiting a friend in jail, and he was telling me about a guy that he knew that was also in jail with him, that he had been kind of doing the wrong thing for a while, but he started to turn it around, and he was making some really good decisions in there. He was being helpful to the guards and things like that, and he was actually promoted to the position of trustee. And because of that, he got some additional benefits. He got different food. He got to have his own TV. He got to have his own place to go to the bathroom. And I know that might be not the biggest deal to you, but to a guy in jail, that's a big deal. And we see in Joseph's life that although he was in prison, God was with him and allowed him to be promoted from within the jail. And one day we read that two men were put in jail, and perhaps when Joseph was checking them in, he got to know them and he heard a little bit about their story. These two men were actually from the royal house, from Pharaoh's palace, and it was the chief cupbearer and baker. They were thrown into prison also. We don't really know why. We don't know if there was a fly in Pharaoh's soup that wasn't found, or perhaps the wine tasted really bad and he didn't send it back and get a new order. Maybe the baker made some nasty food. We don't know, but we know that Pharaoh was a powerful man, and what he said happened. So he threw these men in jail, and one night they have these dreams. You notice earlier on in Joseph's life, he had dreams, but now these two other people have dreams, and they have some disturbing dreams. You'll have to read about it a little more, but when they wake up, they come, and Joseph can see that something's up. And so he asked them, what's going on? What's wrong? And they said, we had these dreams. And we find out that right now in this moment that Joseph was given an ability from God to interpret these dreams. That God would actually, he gave Joseph a gift even when so many people tried to make him guilty. It's amazing. In the story, we see that Joseph interprets these two dreams. These men tell him about their dreams, and it actually comes true. One says that he's going to be restored to his position in 3 days. But the other, the baker, he's actually going to be beheaded. He probably wanted a second opinion after that, but it was too late. And so we see Joseph actually interprets the dream, and it comes true. 3 days later, the cupbearer is restored to his position, and the baker is beheaded. Kind of creepy. It actually came true. Maybe Joseph's dreams when he was younger will come true later too. Keep reading the story. We see that in Genesis 40:23, Pharaoh's chief cupbearer forgets all about Joseph when he goes back to the palace. And why is that important? It's important because the cupbearer made a promise to Joseph. He said, I won't forget you. I'll put in a good report with Pharaoh. Maybe I can get your sentence reduced. But as soon as he's out of prison, he forgets about his trusty Joseph. And think about it, for the next 2 years, Joseph's waiting. Waiting. We know that God's with him, but it's not fun being in prison when the cupbearer got to go back to the palace. But we see right at the end of chapter 3 that chapter 4 is going to be a really good one. We find this transition sentence because we find that Pharaoh has a dream, and he doesn't know how to interpret it, and no one else does too. So all of a sudden, the cupbearer has a light bulb moment, and he says, oh, I remember a guy in prison. He interpreted my dream, and it came true. Maybe we should call him up too. We should call this convict to come into the palace. This stuff, you can't make it up. This is the Bible. You just can't make that up in a story. So because Pharaoh had this dream and no one can interpret it, he calls for Joseph to come forward. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream last night and no one here can tell me what it means, but I have heard when you hear about a dream, you can interpret it. But listen to what Joseph says. Even though he's gone through all of these hardships and troubles, he says, "It is beyond my power to do this, but God can tell you what it means and set you at ease." So we see in Joseph chapter 4, it's going to get good. We see him going from prison consultant to vice president. Pharaoh's so desperate that he brings in a convict to interpret his dreams. What's even crazier, though, is that when Joseph interprets the dream, Pharaoh takes every word to the bank and starts changing his life because of what this Hebrew slave says. Only God could use such a powerless person to change the most powerful man in the world's mind. Well, in this dream, I told you Pharaoh had a dream. In Pharaoh's dream, he saw 7 fat cows that were eaten by 7 scrawny ones. Kind of weird. But then he also saw 7 plump heads of grain swallowed up by 7 withered heads of grain. And God gave Joseph the ability to interpret that dream, and here's what the dream meant. There were going to be 7 great years of harvest, and then there were going to be 7 really bad years where there was nothing. And Joseph said they should find an intelligent and wise man to oversee this process. Joseph, I don't know, where do you think he got that idea? Where do you think this guy that didn't have so much of a background in agriculture like Pharaoh's men did? He got the idea from God. This is where the upper story comes in hand, because God gives these abilities to people that you don't think would have them. The people that aren't influential, the people that are in prison, the people like Abraham and Sarah who were barren and didn't have a child. You're going to see it in the life of Noah. He gave him a vision, and he told him to build an ark when they hadn't even seen rain yet. God is up to something big right here in Joseph's story. And because Joseph's suggestions were well received by Pharaoh and his officials, Pharaoh asked his officials, "Can we find anyone else like this man, so obviously filled with the Spirit of God?" Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has revealed the meaning of the dreams to you, clearly no one else is as intelligent or as wise as you are. You will be in charge of my court, and all my people will take orders from you. Only I, sitting on my throne, will have a higher rank than yours." Wow. Wow. You know, he had it pretty good when he was growing up. He was living the dream with his family. He was his dad's favorite. But in a period of 13 years, he goes from being a slave to second in command over the most powerful nation in the world. Integrity has nothing to do with circumstances. When we face disappointments that try to define us, they try to give us an excuse to disobey from God, to disobey his commands. We need to stay true, because God, as he finds us faithful, he's going to promote us, not necessarily to vice president, but he's going to promote us in ways that we could never dream of. He is searching all over the earth. His eyes are searching to and fro over the entire earth, looking for people who their hearts are fully devoted to him. Integrity has nothing to do with circumstances. And all of this in Joseph's life, it all sets up for chapter 5. In chapter 5, it's so important because we see God's upper story in the life of Joseph. And get ready, because those brothers who sold him into slavery are coming back into this story. Get ready to see where God's going. Because chapter 5 is from victim to giver of grace. From being a victim to being a person in power that gets to show some grace. Well, we told you that this famine was going to be coming in Egypt. 7 great years happened, and then there's 7 really bad years. And these 7 bad years were so terrible that it not only affected Egypt, but the entire surrounding lands. And one of those lands was Canaan, where Joseph's family lived. And because of that, Jacob says to his sons, "Go to Egypt. I need you to go get some food for our family. We're starving. We're about out of animals to slaughter, and we don't have much grain left. Go and buy some. So they go to Egypt, and as they enter Egypt, they see Joseph. Joseph, he's no longer wearing the famous coat, but he's got some royal clothes on, and he has some makeup, and he's not recognizable to the brothers. But when they see him, what do? They bow down. That dream just came true. They bowed down to him. And Joseph, he could have had them killed if he was really still holding on to that grudge. And we can see that it did bother him because he puts his brothers through a number of tests to see if they've changed. And eventually, he puts them through this test to where the youngest brother, who's Benjamin, that was Joseph's full brother, he has to come to Egypt as well. The brothers didn't like that, but he gives them another opportunity to come and bring the brother to Egypt. And so he does, and when he does, a certain number of events happen that lead them to a dinner together. And in that dinner, really cool fact, Joseph actually seats them around the table according to their birth order. But he gives Benjamin, his favorite brother, 5 times the portion of his other brothers. I mean, how creepy would that have been if some just random guy put you and your family according to perfect birth order without even knowing you? They had to know something was up, but they didn't quite put it all together. And what happens is they have dinner and things are going okay, but after that, he sends them away and he sets them up and makes it look like they're trying to steal from him. Specifically, he tries to set his brother Benjamin up, and he wants to see if they're going to give Benjamin away as a slave, just like they did with him earlier. But remember Judah? Remember Judah? Judah is the one who actually comes up with the idea to sell Joseph at the beginning of the story. Listen to how his heart changes. Judah, his older brother, says, "Oh my Lord, what can we say to you? How can we prove our innocence? God must be punishing us from our sins. We will all become your slaves, but please let the boy Benjamin return to his father." Joseph says, "I would never do that. Only the guilty brother must stay and be my slave." Judah says, "Please, my Lord, do not be angry with me, but please let me have a word with you. If Benjamin does not return home, our father will die of grief. His life is bound up in the life of the boy. Please, sir, keep me as your slave in his place." Wow. This wicked guy, you read the story of Joseph in Genesis 37 through 50. He did some really terrible things. But right here, we see that his heart has changed. And he actually volunteers himself as the slave in place of his baby brother Benjamin. And because of this, Joseph broke down and wept, the Bible says. He wept so loudly the Egyptians could hear him, and word of it quickly carried to Pharaoh's palace. Then 3 words come out of Joseph's mouth that his brothers haven't heard in over 13 years. He says, "I am Joseph." He reveals himself. "Is my father still alive?" is the next sentence he says. But his brothers, it says, they were too speechless. They were stunned to realize that Joseph was standing there in front of them. "Please come closer," he said to them. So they came closer, and he said again, "I am Joseph, your brother whom you sold into slavery into Egypt." And just imagine these brothers, maybe it all just clicks in, all those tests that he was putting them through and all those situations it kind of felt similar to what had happened before. It all just started to make sense. And maybe Joseph could see that they were just deflated and felt guilty. Because listen to what Joseph says. He says, "Please don't be angry with yourselves for selling me to this place. It was God who sent me here ahead of you to preserve your lives." It's amazing. "This famine that has ravaged the land for 2 years will last 5 more years, and there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. God has sent me ahead of you to keep you and your families alive and to preserve many survivors. Notice how Joseph comes to understand God's upper story. He sees God's plan in spite of his pain. And he sees that throughout this whole time, God wasn't away from him. God was with him and moved him. He promoted him in this kind of different way than we're used to. It's not the corporate ladder of going from assistant to manager to supervisor to general. It wasn't like that. But God put him in place of power to preserve the nation of Israel, to preserve his family, to keep the promise that God made to his great-grandfather Abraham. The famine would have wiped out Israel naturally. It would have wiped out Israel completely. But God supernaturally puts Joseph in a place to do something about it. Years later, when Jacob passed away, that's the dad, the brothers got nervous that maybe Joseph was finally going to seek his revenge. Maybe he was just, being good while dad was alive. So they come to him begging for mercy, but look what Joseph says to him again. Genesis 50. Don't be afraid of me. Am I God that I can punish you? You intended to harm me. Listen to that. You intended to harm me, but God intended it all for good. He brought me to this position so I could save the lives of many people. No, don't be afraid. We see that even when Joseph has the upper hand now, he still maintains his integrity, because integrity has no circumstances. It has nothing to do with circumstances. And I'd really like for us to just think about our story for a second, because integrity can be one of those things that we struggle to maintain in the face of disappointment. Think about your story as we finish up. Have you ever been in such a mess that lying seemed the only way out? Have you? Have you ever been so discouraged and depressed that drinking or drugs could be the relief for you? Have you ever been so disappointed with your marriage and your family life that the only way you thought you could start over was to get a divorce? Have you ever been struggling so much financially that you thought the only solution was stealing or cheating on your taxes? These are just a few examples, but sometimes when disappointments come, we make an excuse and we disobey God. But we need to see, like Joseph saw and how he acted, that integrity has nothing to do with circumstances. Joseph is a great reminder to us, an encouragement to us that even in our difficult chapters, we need to trust God and do what's right, because integrity has nothing to do with circumstances.